Hello. If you're a regular visitor to YouTube, as I am, then you've probably seen a lot of these edgy videos that are about Nibiru, the planet that is supposed to pass the Earth and create all kinds of havoc. Space aliens with a base on the dark side of the moon. Area 51, a crashed UFO on Mars with two guys looking after it, inspecting it. And these are kind of harmless, and you kind of pass on them, and they don't really amount to very much. But there is one genre that is potentially dangerous, and that is the presentations that resort to the flawed interpretation of the end times from the book of Revelation. These have inspired fear in otherwise intelligent people, and the danger of it is that it could, even though it's nonsense, it could ultimate in a self-fulfilling prophecy, and we wouldn't want that to happen. So the purpose of this session is to reveal the truth about Revelation and about the mark of the beast and the number of the beast and all that, to put it into perspective for you. Now, I'm going to hit the high spots because this is a subject that could very well get tangled up in a whole lot of confusion, so I'm just going to make references and let you follow up the background for yourselves and piece the story together more completely for your own satisfaction. Now, I want to make it clear that I am not doing this for you or to save the world or anything. I have been engaged in over 40 years of research into these occult and mystical things, and I've received a great deal of, I don't know, what we might call received wisdom, and the Bible, if you can imagine an atheist like myself now referring to the Bible, there's a reason for that. Because it doesn't say what everyone thinks it says, and some of this is covered in the videos already residing on my channel. There hasn't been very much play, not too many views, but there is a lot of the background information that will help you to understand this presentation as well. As for myself, I'm not publicizing it. Evangelism is evil. Anything that tries to persuade people to, especially to fear and superstition, then it's evil, and don't bother with it. I see myself as the biblical tree, and the information I put out is as a tree puts out spores. And if you remember the parable of the seeds, well, some of them will fall on rocks, and others will fall into brambles, and some will fall on the roadway to be crushed underfoot. But then there are those who will find a fertile spot of ground to lay down roots and then grow from there. So that's what that's where I'm coming from, and I'm doing this actually for my own fulfillment, because I'm a spiritual being in a human condition. And if you are too, well then welcome aboard. So anyway, to the to the case at hand, I would suggest if you have a Bible, King James, of course, and you would like to follow along with some of these references, then get it ready, because here we go. Now, the argument begins with an advanced culture that was settled in the northwest corner of the Italian boot. And they were compared to the Bronze Age tribes that milled around, they were quite backward. Many of them we have no record of. They left no footprints or echoes of their existence. And it would kind of be like comparing this culture to the other tribes. It would be like comparing the United States to Haiti. Anyway, this culture was known as the Etruscans, and who knows how long they had been in the Crater Lakes up in the northwest part of Italy. But the best guess as to where they came from is that they were probably survivors of Troy after the defeat in the Trojan War. But anyway, they had art, architecture, good governance. Women were fully enfranchised. And they claimed to have received their knowledge directly from the hands of the gods. Now, the home territory of the Etruscans was called Etruria, and it's Tuscany in modern times. And this was a land that was broken up into 12 city-states, each one governed by a prince, and all 12 princes working together kind of ran the country. They didn't do such a good job of that, but that's another story. To the south, about 100 miles to the south or something like that, there was a region marked by 7 hills, and each hill was occupied by a different tribe. The Sabines, the Volscians, the Picerni, and the Latins. And it's the Latins who were predominant. And about the middle of the 8th century BC, they traveled to Etruria and asked the Etruscans if they would build them a city. And the Etruscans, yeah, sure, went along with it. And as a reference, you might look up Robert Paine's book, Ancient Rome, because that is going to be an invaluable guide to understanding this presentation. Anyway, the Etruscans sent engineers, architects, and priests to prepare the land, and they began building. They built a temple of Neptune, but what they built there was the first Roman forum, and it was a DMZ, or demilitarized zone. No weapons were allowed there, and the idea was to encourage the tribes to come down from the hills and sort out their differences and share in the city that was being built. Well, the Etruscans had a monopoly of iron, and they were traders. They had, of course, having iron, they had a well-armed and armored army, a fighting force, and they had predominated on both coasts of the Mediterranean, north and south, for a number of years. And so when they got along with building the city and it started to become occupied, something happened that wasn't in the Latins' plan, or wasn't part of their agenda, and that was the Etruscans ended up ruling the city. And their rule extended for, give or take, 200 years, or 200, 250. And it was finally, and these kings were known as Tarquin kings. It began with Tarquinius Priscus and ended with Tarquinius Superbus, who was overthrown. And this event, according to Robert Payne, occurred between the years 509 and 500 BC. Well, I'm going to go on record right now as saying that it was 501 BC. So keep that in mind for later. Well, that was the establishment of the Roman Republic. And that we're talking about Etruria is suggested in Revelation 12. So if you turn to your Bibles, Revelation 12, verse 1. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. Later on in verse 4, and she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. So not only had they already conquered most of the region around the Mediterranean, but now they were planning, using the new city of Rome as a springboard, to conquer the rest of the world as they knew it. So anyway, the Roman Republic was established, and in the further along, we read where the beast, Rome, was wounded in his head, and the rest of the world thought, well, that's it. They're all done. But they recovered, and the world was astonished at their great recovery. And what this represents, refers to, is the Gallic invasion in 390 BC. A powerful army from Gaul, or present-day France, came south and attacked Rome, chased all the folks. They were ran back up into the hills. The legions, or the armies that they had, were defeated, and they destroyed the city. And they only went away when the Romans paid a heavy tribute. And of course, before the Gauls left, they took their time, 3 or 4 days, looting the city and carrying off anything they found of value. The one general who wasn't disgraced in this operation was one Camillus, and he was actually the first consul. And it was under his guidance that the people decided that they would rebuild the city right where it was. Now, the rest of Roman history goes on, for example, in 82 BC, a patrician, that is the rich, the wealthy faction, the wealthier class, by the name of Lucius Cornelius Sulla, becomes dictator. And the fun really begins when he resigns. This is Sulla. And it's after 2 years, he just steps down and moves down to the retirement in Naples. And I think it's Will Durant's History of Western Civilization that tells about a horrific death that Sulla suffered. He seems to have been poisoned, and from the description, it sounds like somebody gave him some drain cleaner for a libation. Anyway, now that he is gone, the field is left open for his two lieutenants, Crassus and Pompey. Well, Crassus was the wealthiest man in Rome, and Pompey was their most illustrious general. And they were about to, I guess, confront each other and decide who's going to take over as dictator. Well, at this time, Mr. Julius Caesar, who has been busy conquering Gaul, now violates the law, by the way, bringing his legions down into Italy. Weren't supposed to do that. And he interposes himself between these two contenders, Crassus and Pompey. Well, Crassus feels bad because he doesn't have any military laurels. All he has is wealth. But he tends to try to rectify that situation by gathering 10 legions and going off to make war with Parthia. And the Parthians weren't having any of that, so they annihilated the 10 legions, and Mr. Crassus lost his head, literally. So now this leaves Caesar and Pompey to duke it out, and Caesar wins the battle of Lake Pharsis in 54 BC, and Pompey, instead of going to North Africa, where he still had many loyal legions, he goes off to Egypt, to Alexandria. Of course, understandably, the Egyptians were not going to help a defeated Roman general, especially when the victorious general is in hot pursuit. So they lop his head off. I guess this was a pretty common practice. People were losing their heads all over the place in those days. They present it to Caesar when he arrives in Alexandria, and he sheds a couple of crocodile tears, and then he meets Princess Cleopatra. Well, she was actually exiled by the true queen of Egypt, Arsinoe, who was her younger sister. And Cleopatra has already had a reputation for being kind of treacherous, and her little brother Ptolemy the 13th, I think it was. He was a boy of about 14, and he was the pharaoh of Egypt. So, but anyway, she contrived to steal back into Egypt, get rolled up in a rug, and presented to Caesar. It's a well-known story, so we won't delve into it too deeply. However, she gets Mr. Caesar, after she spends the night, that first night with Mr. Caesar, she kind of wears him for a pinky ring. He's ready to do anything she wants. He spends a year with her, and they have a baby together by the name of Caesarion. Well, the sister, Arsinoe, is driven out of Egypt and goes to the temple of Artemis in Ephesus, where she is supposed to be safe. And this was the old idea in the Middle Ages, where if the law was after you and you got into a church, well, that was sanctuary. They couldn't come in after you. And this was the same kind of arrangement, but anyway, somebody did follow her there and killed her. Likewise, Ptolemy the 12th was also assassinated, and as was his younger brother, who was about 9. So that gets Cleopatra got all the competition out of the way. Well, she also had this idea that she was a reincarnation of the Egyptian goddess Isis. And the cult of Isis was already pretty firmly established in Rome, which was pretty tolerant of different religions. So that after the end of the year, at the end of that year, Caesar goes back and starts telling everybody that he feels that he is descended from the goddess Venus. Just strange, well, because, well, some 52-year-old guy with a 22-year-old chick probably feels like he's got the world on a string, you know, and he's probably a great lover. Of course, she was using him, and they ended up using each other. But so this begins a tradition that dates back to the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. And this is what the lords of the world, and if you don't know who they are, just read the just look at the rest of the videos on my channel, and you'll find out. And there's even more. There's going to be some more videos added to it to clarify and expand the discourse. But anyway, the story goes on, and this Cleopatra, who was part African as well as Macedonian, and you know, she was kind of a mixed breed, but her influence carries over to Caesar, who now is worshipped as a god after his death. And this is the connection with the pharaohs back in ancient Egypt, because when they died, it was said that they went off to the west and they either joined the gods, became a god, or whatever. And so this was a kind of a disturbing trend. And the lords of the world didn't care for it very much. His successor, Octavian, the nephew who he adopted, now calls himself Augustus, and if you see the statues of Augustus Caesar, well, you see him with the hand up, and he has a godlike pose. The next emperor in line is Tiberius, and I don't know if he actually claimed to be a god, but he sure lived like one. And after a short time in Rome, he moves down to the Isle of Capri, which he has pretty securitized, to the extent that a land crab a land crab couldn't come ashore without them knowing about it. Anyway, he's enjoying his lifestyle, which is an orgy with his little boyfriends and girlfriends all day, all night, every day. And so it was an atmosphere of debauchery and idle living, drunkenness, and sexual perversions At least that's the story. Well, Tiberius had a son by the name of Germanicus, who was a brilliant general, and he was well loved by the people. And, well, Tiberius arranges to have Germanicus murdered because he's jealous, because maybe Germanicus is getting too powerful. Well, anyway, Germanicus had a little son. His name is Marcus Gaius Nero, whatever, and Caesar, and he was about 4 or 5 years old, and his mother had dressed him up in little military uniforms, complete with a helmet and boots. And he would run around the palace, and the soldiers, the guards and everything, kind of took a liking to him, and called him Caligula, which is little boots. Well, when the time came, Tiberius was ready to head west. The question of a successor to the throne came up, and well, it fell on Caligula. So he goes to Rome, and now here, in Revelation 13, here is a pretty clear reference to Caligula. And it says, Revelation 13, verse 5. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. Now, there's a reason why Caligula is mentioned in Revelation, and that is because he was the first emperor to insist on being worshipped as a god while he still lived. And though he reigned for almost 48 months, almost 4 years, he was only officially emperor for 42 months, because it took about 6 months to be confirmed by the Senate. They wanted to look this guy over for a while and see how he was going to work out. Anyway, so he passed, and in the beginning, he was a pretty nice guy. One of the things he did was to stand on the roof of a building in a public square and just throw coins out to the people and watch them scramble to pick them up. It's only later that he started displaying these bizarre personality traits, which in modern times we could probably say, God, the poor guy probably had a brain tumor, or maybe he turned schizophrenic. Maybe today there's some pharmacology that could have straightened him out, but this was ancient Rome, so Anyway, he got busted by his Praetorian Guard one morning after they couldn't even stand him anymore. And so now we get Claudius and, Nero. Nero was another piece of cake. So we have this string of insanity that is probably traced to a bunch of inbreeding, and things are looking really, really downhill. The empire seems to be in decline. Now, Nero is run out of town and ends up committing suicide with a little help from his friends. The city is wide open, and there's no emperor. So about 4 generals in turn came to the city with their legions, and the generals were elevated to emperor, and then the next general comes along, bumps him out, and he becomes emperor. So there were, I think it was 4 of them that were called barracks emperors. Arriving on the scene finally is the people's choice, a gentleman, a Flavian by the name of Vespasian. And he travels all the way from Palestine. And he is definitely the people's choice. He is a wonderful military leader, a wonderful administrator. He was on a first-name basis with his men. He didn't enjoy any privileges that they didn't have. He ate what they ate. He slept under the stars with them. And so he was generally beloved, and this love transferred over to the people because he was really a swell guy. And a sane and sound administration took over the city of Rome. And it was the beginning of the Pax Romana. And he was modest in his affairs, like he lived in a small palace. And the clothes he wore were made for him by his wife. So the people really thought Vespasian was okay. Now, if you thought Vespasian was okay, then you would have been crazy about his son, Titus. And he's the one that destroyed Jerusalem in 70 B.C. But anyway, was it 170 B.C.? I don't know. Yeah. So, but now Titus was what you might call a matinee idol. He was good looking, about 40 years old, and he was one of the very few potentates, anytime, anywhere, who could go out among his people without any guards. They swamped him, of course, but they were trying to get a hug, I guess, instead of doing anything treacherous. But anyway, poor old Titus dies after only 2 years, and then the fun starts all over again, because his older brother Domitian, who was passed over and who is now 55 years old and kind of sore about not being emperor in the first place, well, now he becomes emperor. And he's a throwback to Caligula because he too wants to be worshipped as a god. Well, after 17 years of a reign of terror, Domitian is finally assassinated in a latrine by his wrestling partners in a conspiracy that his wife even participated in, so you know what a honey bunny he must have been. Well, sanity returns to the governance of Rome with wise old Senator Nerva, and he was about 80 at that time, and he ruled for about for 2 more years until he died. And then along comes Trajanus, or Trajan, the first actually Spanish emperor. His son Hadrian, followed by Antoninus Pius, then the first arguably philosopher king, Marcus Aurelius. Now, why I'm listing these down is because of what the angel tells John. And so John says in Revelation 17, this one of the 7 angels that poured, better back up. One of the 7 angels that poured out the plagues from the 7 vials, kind of sounds like chemical biological warfare, don't you think? Anyway, in the beginning of Revelation 17, obviously, because of the arcane language and the esoteric symbolism, John is clearly experiencing things for which his vocabulary does not contain the words to describe. So here comes this one angel who, soldier, a lesser lord, in other words. Anyway, he comes along to John, and in so many words, he says, "John, look, I know you're kind of stressed out. Let me just tell you what we got going on here." Revelation 17, verse 3. "So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Verse 4. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hands, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. Now in verse 5 we learn that upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. 6. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. Oh, I would too, I guess. Well, this is obviously Rome. If there's any doubt about it, excuse me, just look down at verse 18. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. So, you can get an awful lot of information just by sticking with black figures against the white background and not try to read a lot of stuff into it. Anyway, now we get down to cases. Now, before I go on, let's deal with the mark of the beast. Because, starting with the word beast itself, there's nothing to be afraid of. Why, before automobiles, people rode around on beasts. They're called horses. There were horses and mules, and I think oxen too, who pulled the plows that planted the crops that we harvested and bought at the market for, fruits and vegetables. So don't be disturbed by the term beast. Dogs and cats are beasts. And, of course, then you have cattle, which, get some nice steaks and chops and fries and hamburgers to go with the fries. So anyway, and by the way, your body is the beast. Your spirit rides through life. And this is why we strive for spiritual awareness and advancement, so that we can be in the control of this beast. Because the body is a faithful servant, but it's a cruel master. And if you let it have its way, then you're just along for the ride. And that's called addiction. So that pretty well takes care of that. And I'd like to deal with the mark. So the mark of the beast doesn't really mean anything, because let's not forget that Rome was a great nation, and nations, in order to maintain economic stability and allocation of resources, and to make sure there's enough money in circulation, and for a multitude of other reasons as well, conducts censuses. And so Rome was no different. And of course, only men were counted because women were, chattel. And periodically, when it was census time, these men would travel to their local administrative centers to be counted. Well, the censor, which was the guy with the wax tablet and the stylus, or whatever it was he wrote on, would interrogate the citizen and say, how many kids you got, how big is your house, how many acres, how many cows, pigs, chickens, what have you, and whatever they asked. And then when he got through, either he, if he was working alone, or his assistant, called a pintor, would ask the man if he wanted to be marked on the forehead or the right hand. And and there was a bucket with Tyrrhenian purple and a brush, and whatever the citizen's preference was, forehead or right hand, he got a mark. And this Tyrrhenian purple was permanent. You couldn't scrub it off, you couldn't wash it off. It just had to wear away, and that took about a week. Now, this is there's really no mystery about the mark of the beast, because we still have the mark of the beast today. Now, if you go into a nightclub and pay a cover charge and they allow in and out, they stamp your hand. So if you do go out and come back in, they hold your hand under a UV light, they can see the mark, and you belong. You paid your way. Now, when it comes to the number of the beast, here is the mind which hath wisdom. And this is verse 9. The seven heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And, verse 10, and there are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come, and when he cometh, he must continue a short space. So we can tell that the book of Revelation had to be written in the latter part of the 2nd century, sometime after the year 150 AD. Because otherwise it's an historical record. Well, let's think about these kings. It would have been a miracle had Vespasian alone appeared on the scene, but here were 7 kings who ruled Rome wisely and were fair and maintained the peace, and the people were happy with them. So let's start with the 5 who have fallen. We have Vespasian, Titus, Nerva, Trajan, and Hadrian. Now, we're not counting Domitian, because he was the megalomaniac, a throwback to Caligula. So they are deceased. And one is Antoninus Pius. And if you look at his statues, any representations, statues, he looks like a saint. And finally, in the year 161 AD, the wonderful philosopher king, Emperor Marcus Aurelius, comes to the throne. And he is the other, it says, and the other is not yet come, and when he cometh, he must continue a short space. Well, now, Marcus Aurelius, I'm going to say probably the first philosopher, a great philosopher king, ruled for 17 years. So what means short space? Well, 4 years after Marcus Aurelius takes the imperial throne, a plague breaks out that wipes out more than half the population of the Roman Empire, and it persists for several years. And remember, something that will shortly come to pass, the plagues being poured out of the vials, the Lord's being upset because of the megalomania demonstrated by these inbred Julio-Claudian emperors. So now we have a plague. And if you recall the year I quoted, when the overthrow of the Tarquin kings established the Roman Republic, 501 BC. Well, if you count the years from 501 BC to 165 AD, it's 666 years, the number of the beast. That's all there is to it. So, grow up. Don't be afraid. Don't just dismiss all this ignorance and superstition. And maybe we could save the world a little bit at a time by not buying into this nonsense. And I always like to have, after making a point and delivering an argument, to have one final cap, one final statement that proves everything that came before. Chapter 17, verse 11. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the eighth, and is of the seven, and goeth into perdition. Well, lunacy returns to the imperial throne with Marcus Aurelius's son, Commodus, who was really a piece of work. You ought to read this guy's bio. Woo. And I forget how he wound up. I guess somebody killed him off. But he was a reversion back to the insanity, and things started going kind of downhill after that. But unpopular and perverse as he really was, he has been memorialized by his name being attached to an essential piece of plumbing in a latrine. A toilet, in other words. Otherwise known as a commode. Well, that's the deal, and hope you liked it. If you liked what you saw, well, you might subscribe and read some of the other stuff. And if you like what I just did, then you can hit the like button and tell your friends about it. And but I wish to caution you that I do not. It is not my part to cause anyone the slightest discomfort. I only want to speak to open minds and open hearts. So if you're having a problem with this, or anyone else, then I'm sorry. But it's just the way it is. And so anyway, there's a lot there. Help yourself. And in the meantime, until we meet again, if we meet again, have the best day ever. So long.